Okie doke. So it doesn't, I don't really, not that anyone here really needs it, but I'm going to maybe for the sake of practice, then give just a short ditty on like what is neighborhoods, um, what are we doing here, and how does this inform the rest of the project. So basically, neighborhoods is a framework for online communities who want more control over their group culture. That's really the essence, I think. And so what this translates to in terms of what we're building as team neighborhoods is first a setup wizard that facilitates a basic understanding of the elements in non-coding terms that go into the design of an online social space. And if this were not a challenge enough in itself, we as the neighborhoods team are also committed to delivering a social intelligence layer for neighborhoods. So in addition to this language and this kind of non-technical mode of setting up online social spaces, we're also committed to delivering this social intelligence layer to connect different neighborhoods to each other, but also to do this social sense making that we'll talk about. So of course, these two sides of the project interact, and that's really the whole point, right? Like, I'm feels pretty certain that no one here wants to be using centralized platforms that are mostly profit driven or corporate controlled, but we have trouble leaving it, right? Because of the intelligence features that they offer, recommendations, matchmaking, easy profiles and permissions, and intuitive interfaces make it really difficult for us to migrate to distributed systems. And so we at Neighbourhoods basically think that it's not only possible to do these things on the distributed web, to kind of have that social intelligence that we're used to, that makes Web 2 so attractive. We think it's not only possible to do these things with distributed architecture, but actually that in a distributed context, this sort of social intelligence really requires conscientious and intentional community cooperation. It's a lot of opting in, a lot of awareness of how data is flowing and to whom and why. So that's really part of what we're doing here today, is trying to create a means to understand some of these things that are in the systems we're used to using, kind of going on behind the scenes. A lot of things that we're sheltered from, essentially. So it's an undertaking, but we're trying to make it a fun one. And I'll pass it to Casimir maybe to talk a little bit about the participatory nature of this session, but also kind of like of what we're trying to do with the project.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Emmeline. That was a really nice intro. So this, like the term participatory, it implies that there's an aspect of engagement, bi-directional participation or co-creation. And we think this is really key because especially in software, we have kind of user-centered design often in like the small teams of people that are designing these big platforms, but we don't have a lot of widespread user engagement in choosing and shaping how these platforms turn out. But of course, in neighborhoods, it'll be very different. And so we want to start already now, kind of fielding and sourcing insights and finding out, like in a co-creative process, what is working, what's not, and if our assumptions are hitting the mark or if they're off. So what we share today is really a work in progress, and how you guys respond to it, and if things aren't making sense, that's really for us to learn from, and not for you guys to feel at all like, oh no, I don't get it, because we want to make it as accessible as possible. But it also is a larger kind of design game that we want to engage with, of coming up with what is this widget interface, this space that you would use to set up your neighborhood, and what would be most intuitive and understandable. And so we're playing with all of this kind of in a meta level. But yeah, so this is the background, and we think that it's something new in tech, and something that at least I can see from my background in architecture, that there's a lot of city planning and participatory urbanism in neighborhoods, physical ones, which we could actually learn from and benefit greatly from in creating these digital neighborhoods. So I'm excited for this.
Great. Thank you, Casimir, for that introduction. Like that's, yeah. I really want to emphasize like our intention for this to be a space where we discover flaws, where we're open to constructive criticism, where frustration means that some things needs to change, right? So yeah, it's very often in software, there's like user testing, which creates a distance in between. This is a conversation, right? So just want to make that super explicit, make the space open for people to engage. And yeah, I guess we'll start. How does that sound? Yeah, let's do it. So the work we are presenting here today is mostly based, or is a fraction of our latest research on groupware modularity. We released this series of articles and then a compilation in a PDF a couple of months ago, where we, yeah, just explore what the modules, what the primitive components of social sense making could look like. So what we're gonna be investigating today together is based on that research, right? So yeah, if you haven't read it, I recommend it. Took us a lot of time. I think the language is accessible. It's a good read. But things are changing as well. You will see it if you read the paper and then you compare to this presentation. There's slight changes. This is like a constant evolution. So yeah, let's get started. The first component we want to talk about, and we'll be making like short pauses after each component so that we can have a moment for you to think, how would this map to your own neighborhood idea? Maybe you're working on something already, maybe not, and you can do a speculation right now. Maybe you already have a project that is built in, right? So maybe you can map these elements to the project you already have. That's also a possibility. So yeah, the idea is that we stop a bit on each one and think about it. We'll give some examples. So the first one is very, very simple. It's just the membership, which is the outermost layer of a community. It responds to the question, who can join the neighborhood? Is it a public invitation? Is it just available everywhere through a link? Or is it private, right? You might need to be invited. There's different ways of being invited into a group. Maybe someone else invites you. Maybe it's part of a process, a KYC process even. So just think about the multiple ways in which you get access to digital communities. That is the membership layer. We will have time at the, like, after a few of these to like open up for general questions. But if something is not clear, please just interrupt and we can spend some time on it. But specifically talking about your projects or implementations of this, we'll have some time to talk about it. But clarifications are for sure welcome as interruptions. The next component we're gonna be thinking about is resources. This is extremely central to social networks today, to social media. It refers, we're still struggling with the language here. You can see it even in the presentation. It's the data, the media, the entries in a Holochain context that we make sense upon, right? It responds to the question, what is this neighborhood about? What information will this community share? Share not only as in what we understand by sharing today, but share as in holding together, right? Tweets in Twitter are an example of a resource. a product in Amazon, a song in SoundCloud, articles in a blog or a publication, but also proposals in a poll could be considered a resource. This opens up exciting possibilities. And resource can be composed of any type of media or even software itself, right? So you could have things like text, image, video, a stream of audio or video, files, embedded websites from other places, software like games, a chess game could be a resource, or any other you can think about, right? Some examples of resource where these resource components are grouped together into a resource would be a Git commit. It's basically just a text, right? But if you're talking about a song, you have an audio file and maybe a description or a title. So it's an audio file and a text inside of one single element that we will call the resource. An Instagram post is a good example of it, because you can have multiple images inside a post. You can have mixture of images and videos, and you also have a description. So what makes them resources, when we say that you make sense upon them, in these examples, in the example of Instagram, is the fact that you can like a post. You cannot like each individual image inside a post, you like them as a group. So that's why we consider them a resource in this case. And reactions will come part of the conversation later on, just to keep that in mind. So yeah, think about what a resource could be in the neighborhood you're thinking. What's the main thing? There could be multiple, right? Like it does not have to be a single one. But yeah, just keep that in the back of your mind, maybe make some notes, and we can talk about it when the pause comes. The next component we'll be talking about is contexts, which are the spaces populated by resources, and they also act as an inner membrane within a neighborhood. They respond to the question, what is the best way to present our resources in a visual space? So we're talking interface design here. We're talking how things look and the space in between them. How should they express in an interface? Some examples, some basic examples of context that you have probably encountered could be the feed, which is a one-dimensional context, right? You get things flowing from top to bottom, and there's a very clear ordering of how things are presented within a feed. In a grid, you have 2 dimensions. You could choose different ways in which the information flows in a grid. This is just one way to do it. And then you add complexity to it, right? With a publication layout, let's say for a magazine or for a blog of sorts. Maybe the most important resource has a high visibility area, right? It becomes bigger. It's a hero image maybe. And then articles that are less relevant have less space in the interface, but it's one single context. You can consider that. And then if we continue adding complexity to it, you can talk about timelines, right? Like Instagram stories, where they occupy the whole space of the app, but they are distributed through time. So that's another component that you could have 3-dimensional contexts that are both visual and also time-based. So there you can sort of start to see the complexity, and it of course seems very evident, but this has been for me eye-opening in encountering applications and trying myself to describe them in terms of resources and contexts. And you can start to sort of like untangle the ways in which information is presented, right? The next component we'll be talking about, which is central to sense making in the neighborhoods world, is reactions, which are the gestures we use to convey our impressions of resources. So they respond to a very basic questions, which is how do members engage with the resource shared by others? You've encountered reactions in many ways now. Things like likes, upvotes, downvotes, all of those are reactions in the neighborhoods ontology, but also things like flagging content, right? When you find something that's not suitable for a specific age group, or you want to flag something for whatever reason, you also react to it in a certain way, right? We've come up with this way to distinguish different forms of reactions. This is still not the final version probably, but it's very useful. It has been very useful to think about it this way. And it basically describes two components of a reaction. One of them is how many times can I utilize it? Is it a single time thing, like a like, you either give it or you don't give it? Or is it like a clap, where I can click it multiple times and the counter keeps adding up? The other component of it is the direction in which it affects the resource, right? So if you dislike something, you're conveying that you want it to be diminished, or you want it to be less visible, or for some reason you consider it negative in some way. So it's affecting the scoring in a particular way. Whereas if you give a like, it signals that you like this, that this is a positive thing, that you want to see more of it. So that's the two axes in which you can arrange reactions, and you have all of these examples of different ones, right? We want to sort of say that even though reactions can look different, and we want communities to be able to customize the cosmetic appearance of reactions, they will also have like there will be like a set of maybe templates or common use cases of reactions, so that we're able to interoperate between different communities. But for example, if a SORF community wants to name their type of like a wave, that's cool, right? But when they interoperate with another community, maybe they can both declare it as the same primitive reaction, so that translating from one to the other is easy, right? And then there's the next component, which is assessments. It is closely related to reactions. It is simply a more thoughtful way of reacting, right? It's slow, you think about it, you're really conveying your opinion on something. It is probably accompanied by a comment, maybe. So things like ratings, 5-star ratings, things like grades, all of them would be considered an assessment for us. And one important factor about assessments is that they are a resource in itself. They can be reacted to. So if there's like this, the example I usually give, if there's a ride-sharing app where there's a possibility to give a rating to drivers, like they work right now, and maybe someone leaves a bad rating with a racist comment, the community should be able to react negatively to such comments, so that that assessment has a lesser impact on the final rating of the driver, right? So you can think of it, you can think of assessment as a reaction resource that has like more of a thoughtful engagement. It normally has this pattern of being X out of N or N out of X, sort of like 1 of 5 stars, 1 of 100 in a grade system, or you know what I mean exactly, right? So these are assessments. This is basically the way in which we interact with things, the things, how will things look like? And then underneath them, there's a super important next component, which is scoring. which determines the order in which resources are shown in a context. This is what is referred often as the algorithm. And this is precisely the black box we want to open. We want the algorithm to be collectively owned, collectively decided upon. We want it to be transparent. We want people to have a say in how the algorithm works, how it organizes the things that we find important. So it is fundamental, right? We feed the scoring through reactions, and then there's different ways of utilizing reactions to create different types of scoring. So we see all of the above, but particularly scoring as huge design spaces. I might have shown you some few examples of different modules, right? But we think this is like the space for the marketplace to be like, these are the things people will be adding to the marketplace. Different context, different design of resources, different scorings. Yeah, Greg, you want to speak?
Yeah, I wanted to give Jamie an opportunity to ask a question.
For sure. Please
Thanks.
go ahead.
Yeah, it was just on the last piece, specifically like about grades, let's say. So the example was, X out of 100, but obviously a lot of schools will do it with alphabetical as well. So they'll say, you got an 80, and an 80 is an A minus. So what is the A minus a layer on top of it? Is that what is the A minus? Is that also a resource? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I see two ways of implementing such a thing. One of them would be to have like, how many grades are there in total? Maybe there's, if you do like, what's the worst? F minus, and then like you go to D. I don't know, I've never encountered this grading system, but if you compile all of them, then you can assign just a number to each one of them, and it can be mapped in the interface to the letter and the signs, but it might just as well be an N out of 8, or I don't know how many of them there are. That's one option if you need to operate with them as assessments. If you can operate with them as reactions, then you might do single multipolar reaction system, where you can choose out of 7 different icons that have the A plus, A minus. It depends on the use case, right? But I think there's ways to implement it as the ontology stands.
I could comment on that briefly too, if there's time. I think that if you have something like A through D or A through E that is based upon a numerical percentage score, then that is a layer on top of the numerical percentage, which reduces the resolution or the level of detail intentionally, such that the people involved, the participants in the system, they might care only about whether they got the A or the B. They might not care if it's 91 or 94% or 87 through down to 81%. As long as they get the A or the B, students or participants in any graded system, they care more about the output that people are paying attention to, including a lower resolution output, such as A through E. It's also possible just to start with that A through E and not do percentages at all. Sometimes teachers give grades that simply are A or A minus or C plus, etc., instead of even thinking about numbers. And that's just designing at the lower resolution to begin with. And the level of detail or resolution that you use, there's pros and cons to different approaches for different reasons.
Yeah, and this, I'm happy this is being asked, because it's something I've been thinking about as well, which is having layers on top of the numerical layer, where maybe the number is slightly obfuscated or like not exactly visible, and some threshold has been crossed to go from one abstraction to another. And I find that particularly relevant to signaling something in a casual way that is less, you are less concerned with the final number, and that allows you to some space of negotiation, space of flexibility. So I think that's extremely relevant and should probably be accounted for in the ontology more formally. So I will leave you with an image while I take a note in my super noisy keyboard. But this,
yeah, do that.
these are some of the very simple scorings we have thought about, right? I will talk about them in a second.
Let me know too, one reason you might intentionally use a lower resolution assessment is to reduce the formality involved and to get people to focus more on the informal or organic social processes. Because whether or not we do anything, I think, informally or formally, there's always costs and benefits to both approaches. And I think that's going to be a big part of our dialogue and our participatory design.
Yes, absolutely. That's really, really important. So going back to the scores, these are some ideas of scores, very, very simple, right? Like maybe you have likes affect the visibility of a resource in a linear way, but maybe if it's exponential, you need more likes for it to be visible, or with a few likes, it immediately becomes visible, and then you need like it stays up for longer, even if it gets many more likes. If you have two different reactions, maybe you can have different values for each, so that the things that make you happy go up faster than the things that make you angry. This is a huge design space, as I said, right? And these are very dumb examples, but we're happy to think of many more and to have them already be usable, right? So now we arrive to
Could we, I'm sorry, Anita,
yeah.
do you have a quick question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask whether or not it was essential or necessary to even vote or upvote or have reactions to static resources. So an example might be the glossary. I'm just making things up, but it's like if you have some resources and you want people to be able to see the resources, be it an article or a video, personally, I don't really care what their reaction is. Their reaction is their reaction internally. I want them to have access to resources to use as they so desire. And so having a place for static resources that doesn't need to be voted upon, to me, would be a part of a community that would be important to me. So that's just a thought.
Yeah, that's crucial, right? And I should have mentioned that you only need to add reactions to the stuff you want to be sort of like plugged into a social intelligence system where it's moved around and where its visibility change. But there's for sure things that you will want to keep visible at all times, right? Like rules of engagement in this community. We don't want that to be moving around. Resources in a wiki, for example. But then if you declare them as resources, maybe there's other contexts where you can play with them, right? If you maybe, hey, this entry in our glossary needs more work. So maybe some members of the community can have an internal reaction to it to signal that, we should work on this a bit more. It's not so clear. And even if it does not affect the visibility for the general public, maybe internally you can sense make upon it to know if it needs further work, or that's just an example I'm coming up right now, but I can see maybe the same resource populate two different contexts, one in which it is being affected and one where it's not. That's a possibility as well. And this is, I guess, exemplified in this image right here, which is a bit pulling everything that we've talked about until now together. You have the resources with a reaction, with scoring. So I want to open up the space for us to chat a bit about this, share if you find this useful to describe your ideas, if you're struggling to map it to stuff you're working on. And yeah, just to generally hear your opinion until now. So if anyone wants to speak, please do so.
Can I just follow up a little bit? I was typing a message in the chat to Anita, but I really appreciate you pointing that out, because we, I guess we kind of take for granted at the outset that like a prime like thing to get excited about when you're designing social spaces is like thinking of them as places of just perpetual ongoing feedback, basically. For creators, for posters, for whomever, but like, you want to be thinking about different time scales for different forms of feedback. Otherwise, things like you ever see on a website when there's just like a thumbs up or thumbs down little widget on the bottom right or something, and you're like, oh, now I'm kind of being called upon to like assess this thing that I could have just taken at face value. It's like, it doesn't need to be happening all the time. And I think a big part of like, being more intentional about the way that social spaces work online is like opening things up for comment and then closing them again so they can just kind of be appreciated in their own right. So that's a design space too, is like, what is the time frame of feedback, especially on things that people have worked really hard on, or that you want to be sort of respected rather than contested all the time, like the community rules themselves or something. So thank you.
Oh, Pablo, can you see Alex's comment in the chat? I'm wondering if that's something you would want to look at.
Yeah,
now.
I will read it out loud.
Thank you.
For the recording. Now I wonder how two different neighborhoods interact if they want to share certain resources, like making a centralized feed between two communities. This is exactly the right questions to ask. Like, we are thinking about this in terms of bridging. That's what the sense maker is here to do. It is still, there's like many questions of how this will actually technically work. But yeah, this is in the realm of bridging. We're thinking how context should be like there should be probably a DNA in itself, each context in the holochain, yeah, in holochain terms, so that you can include, yeah, sorry, thanks for the clarification, Greg. SenseMaker is our working term for the app which will connect neighborhoods to each other. So the piece of software in between that allows for bridging and interoperability. So the idea is that a context exists by itself, and you could have multiple neighborhoods have access to one context. Exactly how it play out, I still don't know. We still don't know, but this is definitely in our minds.
I mean,
that was it. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, just one thing from the outset that I think of with that question is that like, you may want to, to kind of strip resources of their, of reactions in certain contexts. Or you may want to condense a bunch of reactions that have been collected over the course of a community's interaction with, like with a set of posts or something. Like say you have like a curated feed, like it's like this community's highest rated songs or something, like you would want to retain something about it, like maybe, in the past 6 months, these were our, like, this is our ranking, but just for the past 6 months, like if you wanted if you wanted to merge the communities on a longer time scale, you'd probably have to compute the feed differently again. But like, you can kind of hear from this that there's like a, like a sort of diplomatic process that needs to happen in cases like that. And so I think it's fair to say that, you don't want to, we're trying to think of these like modes of scoring and calculating a feed on terms that allow you to or that would allow a group like the possibility of really thinking this through on the basis of like, you know, what's important in terms of when we merge, rather than like, you know, this is how it's been for our community. So it's it's like a messy human process. And I think there's some motivation to keep it that way on some level.
Can we take Dave's input at this time? All right, Dave.
Thank you. So I was taking some notes. So I went along, so I have a few different things. Maybe I'll give like a headline of each thing, if that's okay, then maybe we can pick where to. So I see nodding head, so I'll go with that. So one thing that came up for me talking about resources, and I guess before that, I hadn't read the document yet, which in a way feels kind of good because I'm coming at this fresh with not preconceived, you know, after having read it and processed all that. So it'd be interesting to go back and read it and like thoroughly process everything. But so on resources, one thing that came up to me is on the naming convention for that, because when I think of Facebook groups that I'm in or I admin, I think of resources as those things that are from the point of view of things that are useful to community members. So like in a homeschool group, a resource to a person there might mean an event, or I guess that's might be kind of a type as well, or maybe to make the example, maybe it might be a maybe my child has dyslexia, so there's an organization in town that helps children with dyslexia and dealing with that, so that would be a resource. I don't know how critical that is, but just that came up to me. There's like two different kinds of resources, maybe one from the viewpoint of what format it's in, like is it a text file, is it a video, and then there's a resource as it is to a community member and how to distinguish those. Another thing that came up to me, I noted it during context, I don't remember, making things and I'm sure this is being taken into account and it's long down the road, but for folks with disabilities, making things accessible to those kinds of folks. I know you guys are going to be on top of that, so I'll just leave that there. In interesting in the design of interfaces, one thing that I think about, but I have no clue how to solve, but the amount of control a user might have over an interface. A lot of times, the more control given to the user, the more complex it is, and somebody looks at it coming into it, going, "Oh my God, I can't use this. Too messy. I can't even bother with it." So, how do you get that all that control for the user, but make it simple and very easy to use? So, and things I've seen are like, all right, let's start out with this tight window. If somebody needs more, there's this little thing over here you can click on and get access to more stuff and just, I don't know. So that thought crossed my head. And two more things I'll try and get through real quickly. Through assessments, we're talking about basically grades, grading, that sort of thing. And maybe folks have gone into this here, but there's, I imagine, lots of resources and like educational theory and that sort of thing on assessment. And so for me, it's an interesting path to go down, how that might be applicable and what Neighborhoods is trying to do. And then we're also talking about the last thing here, evaluating things over time, which makes me start thinking about like social conventions, like maybe like the Declaration of Independence for the United States and the Constitution. When it was written, it was in that context. and now it's 200 years later, and we have things like amendments. So during that time, it gets evaluated, and then as social structures evolve over time, you have like entirely new contexts. And so maybe at what point do those things maybe come back for reevaluation by the community and that sort of thing? Just as a general thought, and I'll stop there.
Sorry for the mess. Emmeline requested control over the presentation, and now things are moving weirdly.
What?
So
Oh no, I
yeah,
was just trying
yeah.
to, I'm so sorry. I
So
was
you're
trying to give
controlling-
Greg some hosting control.
You're controlling my computer right now, and probably just destroyed the presentation.
Oh
Wait,
my
wait.
gosh. Wait, what do I do?
He added a little bit of humor to the presentation.
Can I stop? I can stop the sharing and then you can re-request.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that okay?
maybe that. Yeah, let's try it. And maybe Dave, you need to repeat the last thing you said. I will try to undo our way back into a workable presentation. Yeah,
So sorry, Pablo.
this is yeah. Who wants collaborative software, right? Like it will just destroy all of our resources. It's a terrible idea.
Right? It opens you up to sabotage by me.
This is a great example of the risk of, letting several different people have their hands on the steering wheel, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay, I think I have it now. Wait. Yeah, I have it. It's ready. So I lost you, or I lost my attention at the moment of like the possibility of assessments and the fact that there's like a lot of theory on assessments, and then you mentioned something else that I didn't hear. Can you continue?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Pablo. So yeah, the thinking about assessments and what kind of input can be provided from like educational theory and how we currently use that. And then after that, thinking about time scale, there's some discussion before about maybe there's a short period of time now where it gets whatever resources get evaluated. And then thinking about down the road, we want to close them at some point and then process and redo and that sort of thing. And then down the road at some point, when might it be appropriate for reevaluation? So for example, like social documents like the Constitution, Declaration of Independence were relevant in their time. Yeah, so those kind of documents were relevant in their time, but hundreds of years later, now we're in different times. And the different times come up. We have things like amendments to those. And so we're in, sorry, hard to frame my thoughts.
Yeah, wait.
So when you get into the different contexts, when do we?
By the way, sorry, I messed things up a bit by removing myself from hosting ability. If somebody can mute that, thank you. Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry for the distractions.
Yeah, no worries, Greg. So if I can sum it up nicely. So the time scale thing, original or documents like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, evaluation in that time is appropriate, and then we cut it off. But then those are kind of living documents because social context changes over time. When do we want to have reevaluations, and how should that look like? And it's going to look different for all sorts of different things. And I think that gets the point.
Yeah, thank you for all of those contributions. I find them extremely pertinent. So I'll address them one by one as best as I can. The naming of resources, I could totally see that changing if it's not like making things clear, or as you said, like maybe distinguishing between different things. So if there's like concrete suggestions, we can totally look at them. Maybe we can chat about it later in the Discord. But yeah, I really appreciate the feedback into the naming, because this work has been a lot about naming, and it's not trivial, right? And we really want to respect the affordances that people already have of conventions. So I really appreciate that suggestion. In terms of context and making them more accessible, yeah, it's something I think about. It's like I still hold that tension between how can something be determined as a context that has a specific layout, for example, while still be accessible in a way that can be collapsed into a linear thing for someone who's using a screen reader, for example, right? How maybe there's a certain way of conveying the scoring of each resource through the screen reader. That's something I've thought about. So yeah, that's also a huge discussion to be held. In terms of the amount of user control over an interface, this opens up the gigantic door of peer-to-peer decentralized user interface, which is just very early on in its development, and like there's very little things that are really pushing the boundaries of decentralized user interface, particularly in agent-centric contexts. There will be various moments where people should be in control of how things look, while retaining some social cohesion through the scoring, for example. Like I can imagine certain things to be considered canon within a group, because there's like, we aspire to have a collective understanding of this, but maybe not for everything. Your list of friends, you can organize that however you want. Maybe certain apps have different options for choosing the scoring and a context, so that you can go from canon to chronological to your own scoring. It's a whole design space, right? But definitely it opens up the world of a very messy UI, which I in certain ways I'm kind of excited for. I want things to be more experimental and ugly, if so be it. So I'm looking forward to this world of UI, personalized UI. And now to assessments, and you opened up again a super important subject here, which is timescales, right? And how things can have moments where they're evaluated and moments where they're not. In the paper we released, there's this example of a research journal, Neighborhood, speculative research journal Neighborhood. And in there, we introduced the notion of stages for the articles that this research journal is working on. And the assessments sort of like make the article research go through a certain steps, right? So it goes from like proposal, then it crushes a threshold and becomes a candidate, then it crushes a threshold and it becomes a published article. So that's one way in which you can have time scales, maybe not through clock time, but through event time. But clock time could also be part of it, right? Like, hey, this is a time critical thing. We're gonna assess these resources for this amount of time, and then we'll close the assessment. That should be a possibility for sure. And I really appreciate that you're already thinking about constitutions, right? Social documents. Imagine a social document that we're doing sense making upon. That would be, that's a beautiful use case.
I chime in with one thing about the user interfaces is that so something we're already seeing happen in Holochain land, which is really exciting to me, is that like you really, in terms of different views on data, you get really automatically, by the way the architecture works with the, the shared DHT and the individual source chain, like an agent source chain, you already get kind of like a native possibility to sort of toggle between like an individual view on data and a collective one. And that's something that can happen kind of like on two levels. Like, so if you're in a bunch of neighborhoods, it would be possible to kind of have like a personal view of like, these are all the neighborhoods I'm in, and these are all the little apps used by these neighborhoods. But then also like a group first view, where you're just kind of in there looking at like things that everyone else from the group can see. So that's kind of how that like individual collective view works, kind of zoomed out, like with an overview of all neighborhoods. But then also within a particular neighborhood, it's like, it's pretty easy. It should be easy to swap between kind of having a view of all of the data that you've authored. So almost like a personal timeline that no one else can see of all of the posts and reactions and, like all of the input you've given, versus that, like Pablo called it, like a canon view of everything that the neighborhood has kind of decided collectively, like, oh, we want to order posts chronologically irrespective of how people react to them, or oh, we want to have shocking things shoot up to the top of a feed, or whatever it is. So there are kind of these two levels on which you get like individual view, collective view, and that's something that is kind of like the natural starting point, I think, for Holochain groupware. So I'll pass it to Greg. You have a comment too?
Yeah, pretty quick now, because both of you gave excellent feedback for Dave's great ideas. Thank you. I do want to note that when we talk about resources in neighborhood, in the formal sense with a capital R, sometimes we're referring to digital media resources which have been added to a neighborhood. And those digital resources could represent any kind of resources, including events, including they could be documents that represent personal reports on something that happened in the past, or they might be data that represents data that's been collected by sensors, by machines and things like that. And of course, they can be video, audio, video files, etc., anything imaginable, including like when we create proposals, that's kind of a social resource. It's like an opportunity for people to seek to fashion an agreement together. So that's a big can of worms, but I guess it's good enough for now to note that resources in neighborhood are digital media resources, and the context in which they have been, the reason that they've been shared to a neighborhood might or might not be crystal clear. And in most cases, it probably is very clear, the reasons that people have added things to social media networks, etc. But we'll probably have a lot of interesting conversations about how we can make the context clear on a case-by-case basis, right? I think I'll leave it at that for now, because there's other things to talk about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, all of you. I just want to again mention something about the social documents that Dave mentioned, because I find it like a really exciting prospect that we're thinking about the rules, terms, laws, ways of engaging, that we think about it in also as a resource. And then you start to see how governance becomes part of the conversation, even if it's not explicitly, we're gonna vote on this, right? Like there's forms of more soft, elastic governance that could emerge from this approach through a combination of reactions. We could be making decisions together. We are already taking decisions, but without sort of like this shrouded in the context of bureaucracy, right? That has that takes away so much of the beauty and the energy out of sharing information, right? So I just want to emphasize that. Okay, I'm gonna continue now with a few more components. I hope it's been not super overwhelming. If it's been, like, and we can stop, please go ahead and say so. There's only a few left. Roles is the next one. And as we go further, these are less, they're a bit more ambiguous and they need a bit more work. So I just want to make that clear. Roles define different types of members. So it basically specifies the access and the rights members have to specific contexts. So if you remember, contexts are also an inner membrane within a neighborhood. So a role is what determines if a member can have access to that context. And if they do, if they have access to reactions and which reactions. You can imagine a neighborhood where there's a moderator role, and maybe only the moderator role has access to the flagging reaction or the blocking reaction to engage with a specific type of resource. That would be an example of a role. Maybe you have a role for readers and writers, and only writers can submit resources, while readers are only able to read the content but not add to it, right? So there's the roles open up this design space of being specific about what members can do and where. So if we go back to this diagram, the membership defines the outer membrane of a neighborhood, and the role defines the inner membrane of a neighborhood. And you can have a neighborhood have various different contexts and roles being as specific as you could imagine, or at least that's what we're thinking about. The next concept I want to talk about is badges, which are distinctions added to members. This is still, like, we're discussing this, and there's like a conversation we're having, particularly with Greg about it. Originally, like, I was thinking about it that it's the capacity for users to be able to have modifiers on how much the reactions add to a score. So it's a way to formalize the community's assessment of someone's expertise. For example, if you think, oh, this person, we regard this member as an expert in permaculture, maybe we want their reactions on permaculture posts to be more valuable, right? So that their input push things to a more visible place. But Greg very promptly pointed out that, yeah, maybe the only having a multiplier on reaction is not as important as, hey, I want to filter what these experts have reacted on, right? And just see what they have liked. Even if their like is value double or not, that maybe in a small neighborhood, that makes a huge difference. But in a super large neighborhood, maybe it doesn't, right? And then the filtering capabilities through badges become much more relevant. We can also think how badges are minted. Are they automated? Maybe if you have contributed a certain amount of resources that have been valued highly in the community in a certain period of time, you're like, hey, contributor of the month, you get a badge. And during that month, maybe there's something that badge enables you to do. It's, again, a whole design space, but we want to introduce it so we think about it. Please, Greg, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something else to that. I think maybe badges could be one way to bridge regarding Dave. You mentioned educational assessments, the history of that, educational and academic assessments. I think one of our greatest potentials is going to be trying to bridge in between professional assessments and peer-to-peer assessments within communities, and badges could be a great way to develop some more of that social intelligence inside communities that might be very general and open communities, whereas some might actually be pretty specialized or semi-professional to begin with, but nonetheless, it might still be helpful to create some filterable badges. Dave, go ahead, please. Sorry, Pablo. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, I'll be real quick. Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about with the homeschooling and creating the potential to create new avenues, pathways for children, other than go to school, go to college, get a job, or go to school, get technical training, get a blue collar job. What are other pathways and other assessments like badges in communities indicating expertise could possibly create other flows for children, other pathways for kids to go to find their place in the world and contribute and all that sort of stuff. So that's really neat to hear.
Absolutely. Like this is extremely relevant, and we can start to think, if we introduce notions of bridging, how you could have badges be super relevant to that process. So maybe you've acquired certain badges within a community that then signal very specific expertise within another community that might value it differently as well, right? How does the urban gardening community deal with the badges from a more rural community, right? Like maybe there's a moment of like, hey, your badges are valid here for the space of 6 months, and then you have to build your own badges within this space. There's like different bridging mechanisms that we can think about it. Communities will determine this. And yeah, badges can also be the way to bring certifications from the physical world to digital spaces. Maybe they have like a form of KYC where you upload certificate from a workshop that you took, and it then becomes a badge in a digital space. Like they also can create that bridging capability with the physical world. So I believe for now these are all of our components. I want to just look back at the minimum memeable viable product that we released earlier this year as an example of this being put into practice with very simple neighborhood, which is composed of a meme resource, which is basically an image, in a feed context, which is linear. So here you're seeing 2 screenshots at different moments of the feed, and where you had 2 different reactions that were multiple. So you could either do lols, which is the laughing face, or mind blowns, which is the head exploding face. You could click them as many times as you wanted. And in this case, we had 4 different scorings. So in one scoring, the equal value, they were valued the same. In the only lols, then only the reactions made through that reaction were pushing things to the top, or the other way around. And we also had an example where mind blowns were valued double to affect the scoring of lols. Just a simple example so that you see how we've put into practice this this ontology. And then there's the example of the research journal neighborhood, which is exemplified in the paper. It is a bit too complex to go into it right now, unless there's like a huge want for that to happen right here. We could do that. But otherwise, yeah, it's, I believe until now, like the most complex speculation on a possible neighborhood and sort of what this ontology could create. So yeah, you could look at it in the paper. We can reach out and talk about it at another time. But just to put into context the stuff we've seen now. And I see, Dave, that your hand is up. I don't know if that's still from the last comment or if you still have something to say. No, okay. So I again open up the space for us to talk about your projects if you want, or if, what time is it? Is it late already? Yeah, we're close to we have 10 more minutes. So yeah, I want to open up the space for you.
I guess I'll just share then. This was really educational and I learned a lot. Thank you, Greg, for inviting me and opening this space to learn more about neighborhoods. I'm an interaction designer and I'm also was homeschooled and am dyslexic. So when Dave was sharing the example, it really hit home. I was really thinking about, well, it was really cool with the badges, really cool with the organization. I guess like just the way that you're approaching organizing all the information that people will be feeding in is pretty refreshing. And I was thinking about how would it look like for the individual versus if they're if they have certain badges, which means that I guess their vote or their reaction would be heavier if that would on their personal feed mean that certain articles or resources would be up further for them to react to or something like that. That's just a note as I'm reflecting. My mind definitely feels blown. So, just taking it all in and thank you so much for sharing. It's awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. Yeah, it's nice when you get confirmation that this is making sense, right? Because otherwise get too deep into it and maybe it's not making sense. But yeah, thank you for your comments. And would be great to talk more about in terms of like specific user experience. How could this feel, right? It's a huge question. The wizard for this huge design space. Yesterday we were jokingly saying that we would like to have a mascot, like sort of like help you out throughout the process of creating a neighborhood. So it feels
That's
more
not a
approachable.
joke.
Yeah, it's not. I'm being serious. Yeah, but yeah, I'm super welcome to engage more in this conversation. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
I'll jump in. Yeah, this was a fantastic presentation. As someone who feels pretty familiar with this stuff, I feel like this way of explaining it was the fullest, maybe, with everything, or maybe it's because I had a lot to build it on. But I'm imagining, I want to see almost examples of already created like websites and spaces as reframed through neighborhoods. And so I'm, just to help people understand it better. And I'm thinking specifically of the 61, which was a really interesting before SoundCloud kind of website where people could upload Creative Commons music that they created and other people would vote on it. And then you'd like get a multiplier if other people voted it up and it became popular. Like it had all these like elements to it that really were very interesting and I think would be a really great use case. And then another one is something I'd mentioned in the past was Piroto Mountain, which was a word game where it's a text-based game originally for BBS where everyone's a wizard and you're answering trivia questions to climb and you gain spells that you could do certain things to other wizards like Befuddle, where it would make it so if someone else tries to put a text post, it would come out in all gobbledygook for the next like 4 hours or something like that. So it'd be really, really interesting to kind of, even just imagine like, how would we build something like this? Like what would this look like? What's a resource? What's this? So I would be very interested to sit down with anyone on the team who wants to kind of explore, map this kind of stuff out and talk about it further. So
that sounds amazing. Sorry, very fast before you speak, Sam. What's the name of the game? Can you repeat?
Piroto, Pyroto Mountain. It went down like 15 years ago. Like it's yeah, you'll find like a wiki page on it, but you won't find much else. But yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Sure
Sam,
thing.
if you wanna speak.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to express my, wonderful pleasure at hearing what you're saying and the great work you've done and how easy it is to, understand now that maybe I've spent enough time with it, but I'm really starting to appreciate what it is that you're building. I think it's really fabulous. I think it's great. It's going to be very useful to allow communities to express themselves in a way that is relevant to them rather than to somebody else who's deciding from on high how that should happen. And I guess really my question is, and I know that this is something that's fundamental to you guys, is we're talking about members of staff, maybe as moderators or whatever, who might have more influence. How do we create a space where that influence is moderated for the moderator, if that makes sense? That's really kind of the question I have. If it can be answered, that'd be great.
I can give a short input because I assume some of the other members of the team have stuff to say. So first, there's something I wanted to say for Jamie first, which is that we are planning on having by the end of the year, early next year, a very simple interoperability between like an example of a context, 2 or 3, an example of 2 or 3 resources, 2 or 3 scorings, and just being able to combine them all together. That's something we're working on. So yeah, addressing your idea. And then to what was just said, I totally agree with that. That's very, very important. I've been thinking about it. I know this is, many of you are considered community activators, but I'm thinking how to decentralize the community activation, how to moderate the moderators. Maybe it is through badges. Maybe there's a system of badges and roles that are created dynamically that allow people to scale up in the organization, hold a bit more responsibility. Also paths to losing certain badges, right? That's again a design space that we're considering. I'm also thinking a lot about how those paths for redemption look like if you've committed something that the community deems like maybe that you've been sanctioned, there should be a path to regain certain credentials. It's not the same if you lost it to regain it, right? Like it's not simply going through the path again, maybe it changes. Again, huge design space, but we're thinking about it, but we're super happy that we see that resonating with you. And if there's like inputs, ideas, we can have like more focused conversations on those topics. That would be amazing.
I could weigh in very quickly on that. One of the reasons I like the idea of enabling badges to operate as filters is to create lossless information, but information which can be organized according to the preferences of the neighborhood and also according to the preferences of each individual user ultimately. So we can distinguish between the attitudes in the community and the attitudes in the team if need be. And often we'll see, I think, that participatory design processes and inclusive processes will involve some decision-making by whoever is responsible for a particular project, but they also ought to be in consultation or using an advice process with a much bigger community and trying to make that advice process as open and inclusive and intelligent as they can. That's what I wanted to add about that.
Another thing that comes up with moderation is that I think that like part of the reason why there are a lot of like benevolent dictatorships in like with moderators like on Reddit and stuff is I think there's actually kind of like a diffusion of responsibility. Like I think it's actually difficult to find people who want to play the moderator role, and so there's kind of like a begrudging like holding of the keys that happens oftentimes. But then often also on like on Mastodon, right? Like other big federated social media, like people will usually just like the communities are small enough that people just ping the moderator and like have that direct discussion, like if something's off or if something isn't serving them. So there are like a couple reasons why moderation doesn't happen in a more distributed manner. And so it would be really cool to address some of those root causes by like, I don't know, having like an easy, like this is how it's been done in the past in this community, like a manual or something like that. So I think, yeah, there's something to it. Like, and this is something that I would want to pursue as neighborhoods, or like that I hope we end up making cultural templates for, is like, how to do like a rotating moderator sort of thing, and how to like explain to people that it's like it's like a fun privilege and like an interesting experience rather than just like another responsibility.
Pablo, we're a couple minutes over, but do with that what you will, please.
I want to, well, first, thank you all for coming here. And before we say goodbye, I want to open the space for Casimir to share a teaser of what is coming up next in this process of participation. Like, it was sadly not very participatory today, and I apologize for that. We're aspiring to more playful engagements, and we're building up for that, right? And hopefully next time we meet, we can work more on specific cases that you have in mind, play with the ontology, and yeah, Casimir has been working on creating resources for that to happen. So we're just gonna tease that and probably then open up for last comments and then say goodbye.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. And yeah, again, wonderful session. So to kind of show what we've been playing with and preparing for the next session, we've made this board here on Miro. And so we're thinking to take it from the conceptual kind of, in the mind space into a more visual board-based space, two-dimensional space. We are starting to map out this is a very basic neighborhood for writers to share short stories, and then to have readers that react to them, and then to have those scored in a feed. But kind of starting to make this space where we can play with designing other sorts of neighborhoods using other components from our library here. So describing how they all work. And then, yeah, you can see these can be dragged around, placed onto the board, reconfigured and connected. And then, of course, before doing all of that, a space to give your neighborhood a name and describe its purpose. So yeah, we really feel that, I think, Sam, you were touching on this, like it's really important to connect this kind of flow of information to a more visual and like comprehensible, seeing the whole thing. And we also hope to, I think, do some analysis of platforms that we're more familiar with, maybe to give an example of how would we map Twitter on this, for instance. Yeah, that's a sneak peek. I can share the link to that board here for anybody who's enthusiastic or curious to peek at it more or play with it even. It's totally open. Just grab one of those boards, put your name on it, and play around. And then, yeah, hope to see you in the next Salon.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for sticking around a few minutes longer. That's super, because this was a very rich session. And there's a Discord invite in the chat here. Also email engage@neighborhoods.network or me, or join us on Twitter to follow up. Any way that you do, we're very grateful to be in community. Emmeline, you can stop the recording, I guess, and hopefully we'll have that available within a week or 30